In just 67 seconds, 20 names, 100,000 pages of FBI documents, and one simple question would expose the biggest institutional cover-up in federal law enforcement history. Congressman Thomas Massie didn't expect Patel to admit he'd never read the victim testimonies. Patel didn't expect a Republican to destroy his credibility. Cameras captured every moment of panic as the FBI director realized he'd been caught in a lie that spanned 3 presidential administrations. What did Massie reveal about Epstein's client list that made Kash Patel's defense collapse on live television in front of the House Judiciary Committee? September 17, 2025, 10:47 a.m. Rayburn House Office Building. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie approached the microphone carrying 4 manila folders that would expose what the FBI had hidden for 6 years. The Kentucky engineer-turned-congressman had built his reputation on asking questions establishment figures wanted to avoid. Today would be his most devastating interrogation yet. FBI Director Kash Patel sat projecting confident authority, believing he'd survived the worst. He had endured 4 brutal Senate hours the previous day deflecting questions about Charlie Kirk, FBI firings, and buried Epstein files. But Massie wasn't a Democrat scoring political points. He was a Republican who cared more about truth and party loyalty, making him infinitely more dangerous. Chairman Jim Jordan recognized Massie for 5 minutes of questioning at exactly 10:47 a.m. The chamber didn't fall silent, it held its breath. Political reporters who had been half paying attention suddenly looked up from their laptops. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in on Massie's face, capturing the expression of a prosecutor about to present evidence that would change everything. Democratic staffers exchanged confused glances, wondering why a Republican was about to attack the FBI director. Republican staffers looked nervous, sensing their carefully orchestrated defense of Patel was about to be obliterated by one of their own. The hearing had already been contentious for 3 hours. Democrats pressed Patel on immigration enforcement and FBI politicization. Republicans defended him with arrest statistics. But one explosive topic remained carefully avoided: the complete list of men named by victims in FBI documents as recipients of Epstein's trafficking operation. Until Thomas Massie decided to detonate that silence with documentary proof that neither party wanted exposed. "Mr. Chairman," Massie began, "I have 4 documents for the record." He held up the first folder. This quotes Alexander Acosta, the former U.S. attorney who gave Epstein that sweetheart deal, saying, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone." The words "belong to intelligence" sent shock waves through the chamber. Intelligence connections to Epstein weren't conspiracy theories, they were on record, admitted by a federal prosecutor told to back off. "The second document, Yasioy," Massie continued, "is what Epstein's bodyguard warned about his CIA connections. Third is Epstein's private calendar reveals meetings with CIA chief. Fourth is a Wall Street Journal article on Ehud Barak's 36 meetings with Epstein, Israel's former prime minister and military intelligence head." Chairman Jordan, visibly uncomfortable with where this was heading, quickly interjected without objection to enter the documents into the record, hoping to move past the intelligence agency connections as quickly as possible. But Massie wasn't finished establishing the foundation. He needed everyone in that chamber to understand that Epstein wasn't just a wealthy predator, he was a connected intelligence asset whose crimes had been systematically protected by people at the highest levels of multiple governments. The intelligence angle wasn't speculation, it was documented fact. Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney who gave Epstein that infamous 2008 non-prosecution agreement, had publicly admitted he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to back off. Ehud Barak, Israel's former prime minister and head of military intelligence, had met with Epstein 36 times, meetings documented in Epstein's own calendar alongside CIA officials and high-ranking government figures. This wasn't the work of a lone predator. This was a systematic operation with institutional protection. "Director Patel," Massie said, his tone sharpening, "yesterday Senator Kennedy asked you, who did Epstein traffic these women to? Your reply was, there is no credible information that he trafficked." "Congressman, what I said was that according to case files constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007, Massie cut him off. "Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They don't apply to Southern District of New York, which produced the 2019 indictment and thousands of FD 302 documents, FBI victim interview summaries." Then Massie delivered the bomb. "According to victims who cooperated with FBI, these documents in your possession detail at least 20 men, including Jess Staley, Barclays CEO, who Epstein trafficked victims to." Reporters began frantically typing. Democratic members leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Republican members looked stunned, realizing one of their own had just destroyed their defense with facts they couldn't dispute. Massie continued, "Victims including Virginia Roberts Giuffre named 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth hundreds of millions, one royal prince, one music industry figure, one prominent banker, one government official, one former politician, one Italian car company owner, one rock star, one magician, 6 billionaires including one from Canada." The specificity was devastating. A royal prince, everyone in that room knew exactly which prince had been repeatedly linked to Epstein through court documents and victim testimony. A rock star, a magician. The details made it impossible to dismiss as speculation or conspiracy theory. These were real people named in real FBI documents that the FBI director was supposed to have reviewed before testifying to Congress about their contents. At 10:48 a.m., exactly 67 seconds after Massie began his questioning, he delivered the question that would expose Patel's lie and end his career. "Director Patel, have you personally reviewed those FD 302 documents where victims name the people who victimized them?" The silence was so profound you could hear breathing through chamber microphones, every eye fixed on Kash Patel. He had two choices: admit he lied yesterday when he said there was no credible information, or admit he'd never actually reviewed the victim testimony in his own FBI databases. Either answer would destroy him. "I personally have not reviewed all of them," Patel said quietly, barely audible, "but the FBI has." The admission hit like a physical blow. The FBI director had testified to the Senate under oath that there was no credible information about Epstein trafficking victims to other men. Now he was admitting he'd never actually read the victim testimonies that contained exactly that information. He had made definitive statements about evidence he'd never personally examined. Massie pounced immediately. "So how can you sit here in front of the Senate and say there are no names when you haven't even reviewed the documents that contain the names?" Patel tried desperately to recover. "What I said was, I named one today. What I said was we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice and FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing not credible information." The Freudian slip was telling. Patel had started to say incredible information before catching himself. It revealed what he really thought: that the victim testimonies were incredible, meaning too extraordinary to believe, but multiple prosecutors across multiple administrations had deemed them credible enough to document in official FBI records. Massie pressed harder. "Were you present when the Attorney General released the Epstein binders to social media influencers at the White House?" "I was, yes," Patel admitted. "So if you were willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims themselves?" The moral clarity was devastating. The FBI director had time for TikTok influencers staging a publicity stunt, but not for actual survivors who had been asking for answers for years. "The FBI will meet with anyone who has information," Patel replied weakly, using institutional passive voice to avoid personal responsibility. "Will you personally meet with them?" Massie pushed, demanding accountability. "The FBI and the professionals handling the cases will," Patel deflected, refusing personal commitment. The contrast was damning. Patel would personally attend publicity events with social media influencers but would not personally meet with survivors. He would make definitive statements about evidence he'd never personally reviewed. He would claim there were no names while sitting on FBI documents containing 20 names. The pattern of institutional indifference and personal cowardice was undeniable. Then Massie delivered what would become the most viral clip. "Have you investigated any CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?" Patel's answer was carefully conditional, revealing the limits of his authority or willingness. I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file. I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us. Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? Massie pressed. If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads. Patel replied with bureaucratic hedging that destroys public confidence. If such a file exists. If it hasn't been shared, the FBI will look. Every conditional phrase signaled that even now, 6 years after Epstein's death, there was no definitive assurance that every relevant file had been examined. Within minutes, number 20 names trended worldwide with 3.8 million tweets. The clip went viral with 67 million views in 24 hours. TikTok videos breaking down each category of perpetrator dominated trending pages. Instagram stories speculated about which specific individuals matched each description: the royal prince, the rock star, the magician, the 6 billionaires. But the most damaging revelation wasn't the list, it was Patel admitting he'd never read the victim testimonies before claiming they contained no useful information. Legal experts were unanimous. Former federal prosecutor Ken White told CNN, "This is worse than lying. He testified about documents he never read. He made factual claims about evidence he never examined. That's institutional negligence that betrays every victim who trusted the FBI." Conservative media fell silent. Even Fox News couldn't defend an FBI director who admitted he hadn't read victim testimonies. Tucker Carlson, who had previously praised Patel, opened his show that night with unusual restraint. We need answers about why an FBI director would make definitive statements about documents he never personally reviewed. The bipartisan criticism made it impossible to dismiss as political theater. This wasn't Democrats attacking a Trump appointee. This was a Republican congressman exposing institutional failure that transcended party lines. Thomas Massie had prioritized truth over tribal loyalty, and the evidence was too overwhelming to spin. Within 72 hours, 3 FBI whistleblowers came forward. "We were told the Epstein investigation was politically toxic and career-limiting," one agent told the Washington Post anonymously. Nobody wanted to touch it. Director Patel made it clear he didn't want comprehensive answers that might implicate powerful people. The human cost became clear as victim advocacy groups revealed the psychological impact. Survivors who had spent years cooperating with FBI investigations, providing detailed testimonies about their abuse, now learned that the FBI director had never even read their words before publicly claiming their allegations weren't credible. The betrayal was devastating and systemic, spanning 3 presidential administrations who all had access to the same 20 names and chose to do nothing. By October 2025, Patel's position was untenable. The Maxwell scandal, UFC Jets, bungled Kirk investigation, and proven negligence regarding victim testimonies made him the most embattled FBI director in history. But what sealed his fate was Massie's 67-second interrogation exposing the institutional rot beneath everything. The moment when Massie read the list of 20 men named in FBI documents became a watershed in congressional oversight. It proved that even in an era of deep partisan division, a single congressman armed with documentary evidence and moral clarity could still hold power accountable. It showed that some truths are too important to bury, even when both parties might prefer to avoid them. And it demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous question isn't the complex legal argument or the partisan attack. It's the simple question that exposes what everyone already suspected, but nobody wanted to admit. Have you actually read the documents you're testifying about? When the answer is no, everything else collapses. The institutional legitimacy, the bureaucratic defenses, the careful parsing of language, all of it becomes meaningless when a federal official admits he made definitive statements about evidence he never examined. That's not governance, that's not law enforcement, that's systematic institutional failure masquerading as professional competence, and Thomas Massie exposed it in 67 seconds that will be studied in law schools and political science courses for decades as the perfect example of how to dismantle institutional corruption with nothing but documented facts and moral courage. The moment when Massie read the list of 20 men named in FBI documents became a watershed in congressional oversight. It proved that even in an era of deep partisan division, a single congressman armed with documentary evidence and moral clarity could still hold power accountable. It showed that some truths are too important to bury, even when both parties might prefer to avoid them. And it demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous question isn't the complex legal argument or the partisan attack. Sometimes it's the simple question that exposes what everyone already suspected but nobody wanted to admit. Have you actually read the documents you're testifying about? When the answer is no, everything else collapses.